On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, it's time to talk about Red Sea Convoys again. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to this episode. So we talked about Red Sea Convoys way back in December of 2023, right after the Houthi, that faction in western Yemen. Yemen is in the midst of a civil war, a three-way civil war going on, and the Houthis are one of those three factions. They started to attack commercial ships that were traversing the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandab, and the Gulf of Aden. It started with a very dramatic helicopter assault on board a car carrier, the Galaxy Leader, in November of 2023. This ship is partially owned by an Israeli. That ship was seized by Yemen, by specifically the Houthi, and then sailed into their waters, and the ship and crew, by the way, are still being held 8 months later. The Houthi have upped their attacks. They are attacking these vessels because they say they're targeting ships that are either owned or operated by Israeli, American, or British companies because of the Israelis' attack into Gaza, which is a response to the Hamas attack out of Gaza into Israel. And we could talk for hours about the Israeli-Palestinian Hamas Gaza incident, but that's not what the subject of this video is about. This video is about global shipping along with this channel, and we're focusing on the attacks being perpetrated by the Houthi against commercial shipping and what can be done to diminish the impact of their attacks. Because the attacks, while they have not been significant over the course of over 8 months, they have managed to sink one ship that sailed through, the Ruby Mar. They have killed 3 merchant mariners on board a ship, a bulker called the True Confidence. But now this most recent attack has killed another merchant mariner, the 4th person killed in this voyages around the area by the Houthi. And in the meantime, the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, the Koreans, the Japanese, even the Chinese, all have naval forces in and around this area. And it doesn't appear that much is being done to ensure the safe flow of goods through this region. And so we're going to talk about a concept that maybe those navies should be adopting. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. So we have talked about on this channel for a long time, going back into December of 2023, the need for Red Sea convoys. And the question became, how are you going to ensure the safe passage of vessels? Because what is precluding vessels from sailing through the region is not so much the Houthi attacks, because again, you can count basically on 2 hands the number of successful attacks against vessels over the course of 8 months. What the Houthis have done, however, is driven up the war risk insurance. This is the cost it takes to sail through a region. Ships have hull and machinery, they have protection and indemnity insurance, but to sail through a war zone, you have to get war risk. And war risk insurance is probably running around 1% the total value of a vessel. And if you look in this image here and you see this Maersk container ship sailing through the region, a ship of that size with that much cargo on board could have an insured value of anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion. And a 1% war risk insurance policy on such a ship would cost $10 million if that vessel was worth $1 billion. And so it is just more economical to sail around Africa, pay the extra $1 million in fuel, don't have to pay for a Suez Canal passage, which is $500,000 to $650,000, than to pay anywhere from $5 to $10 million for war risk insurance. And one of the questions that I raised very early on is, whose prosperity are we guarding? The U.S. Navy, along with the Royal Navy, initiated Operation Prosperity Guardian. And what this entailed was the movement of the Dwight D. Eisenhower battle group into the region, but specifically the use of U.S. Navy Burke-class destroyers, supplemented by Royal Navy destroyers, providing gatekeeper. Basically, the U.S. and the Royal Navy provided a string of destroyers around the coast of Yemen, and they would catch any drones or missiles that flew at them. And in a parallel operation, which was not Operation Prosperity Guardian, which we were sure to tell you, in Operation Poseidon Archer, the U.S. and the British launched missiles into Yemen along with airstrikes to break up those attacks. However, what we've seen is not only have those attacks continued, there's been peaks and troughs, but the number of U.S. Royal Navy vessels involved has diminished to the point now where there's not enough warships under Operation Prosperity Guardian to ring Yemen with Aegis-class destroyers and warships to shoot down everything that's coming. And so what we're seeing is successful attacks against vessels. This is the motor vessel Tudor. This is that Liberian-flagged bulker that was sailing from Russia, heading to India with Russian grain on board. Again, the Houthi always talk about the fact that they're trying to stop Israel, and yet they're attacking vessels carrying Russian grain heading to India. They used a unmanned surface vessel for this strike, causing extensive damage to the ship. An image was caught of the vessel. This is from MT Anderson on Twitter. Caught this. This is the satellite imagery of the vessels. The ship is still afloat, adrift in the area. No other vessels in and around it. This is the UK MTO's office warning on it. It was a series of warnings that you'll see here that was issued. The initial warning talked about an incident. The second update was the vessel had been hit in the stern by a small craft about 5 to 7 meters in length. The second update was the master reported the vessel is taking water and not under command. There is reports out that it potentially was hit in the engine room, which is the worst place for a bulker to get hit. It's one of the few places that is not filled, and so when you start taking water into the engine room, you'll start flooding. This is what happened to Ruby Mar. And the third update, the master reports the vessel was hit for a second time, this time by an unknown airborne projectile. The crew was supposedly abandoning ship. So the Houthi are claiming the right to attack vessels sailing through. Yet, under UNCLOS, the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, which Yemen signed and ratified, there is a section entitled Section 3, Innocent Passage in Territorial Waters. And under Article 17, the right of innocent passage, subject to this convention, ships of all states, whether coastal or landlocked, enjoy the right of innocent passage through the territorial water. And it defines what it means in Article 18. That means traversing that sea without entering internal waters or calling it a roadstead or port facility outside internal waters, or proceeding to or from the internal waters, or a call at such roadstead or port facility. Now, let me diffuse this real quick, because I know people are screaming at the screen right now, and I will scream right with you. But Sal, the United States has not ratified UNCLOS, and the reason for that is very simple. We're idiots. The United States should ratify UNCLOS. It's ridiculous that the U.S. doesn't do it. But that's the U.S. Senate, and no one has ever accused the U.S. Senate of being a rational body. They will argue that the sun is up if it's the middle of the day. This is what they do. And the fact that we haven't ratified UNCLOS does not mean that Yemen has a right to break UNCLOS. And again, Houthi is not Yemen. They are not the recognized government of Yemen. And therefore, this is a group, a state, not even a state, excuse me. It's a non-state actor that's initiating these attacks and violating a international convention. And the fact that there hasn't been a unified, and I say unified, I mean not Operation Prosperity Guardian. I don't mean the EU's Operation Aspides. I'm not talking about the Koreans, the Japanese. What you have, the Indians, all these different groups are operating. There's no unified effort here to halt the Houthi attacks. And what we've seen is over the course of 8 months is the number of attacks haven't really increased, but the defense has diminished. And if we're going to take UNCLOS at its word, and it is the international law of the sea, then we need to take action against what the Houthi are doing. That doesn't mean, by the way, that anyone is sanctioning what is going on in Israel, in Gaza at all. But you can't sit there and say you're attacking Israeli vessels when you're attacking ships that carry grain to Iran, grain to India, are owned by corporations that have nothing to do with Israel. And then you can't sit there and say, well, because the US and UK attacked us for attacking Israeli vessels, we're going to attack their ships. They don't have a right to shut down a key ocean passage in which 15% of the world's freight moves from Europe to Asia and back again. And that is the impact that they're having right now. So why have these attacks increased? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one is we've seen a diminishing of the amount of resources in and around the area. The U.S., which at one time had 6 Aegis-class vessels in and around the area, the Eisenhower battle group, a cruiser, and up to 5 destroyers, is now down to the Eisenhower, a cruiser, and maybe 2 destroyers in the area. The British have a warship in the area, and the European Union have about 4 vessels in the area. Their command ship is actually a logistics vessel, so it can't really do much. And the frigates it does have are good for point defense, but not really for the broad overall anti-air defense that is needed. So we've seen the diminishing of the capabilities in the area. What the EU have adopted is really providing escorts for the vessels. Now, we saw this early on with the French and then the Italians and some other nations providing escorts for ships that are connected to their nation. They may not be flagged in their nation, but for example, the French took a lot of effort to ensure that CMA-CGM, the national container ship line that operates out of France, had protection for their vessels going through. And so we saw that protection. On the flip side, the U.S. didn't do that for U.S. flagships. Matter of fact, we saw U.S. flagships come under attack and actually turn around. The case of the Maersk Chesapeake, the Maersk Detroit, and more importantly, a Liberty Marine vessel that was loaded with military equipment actually turned around in the Red Sea and sailed all the way around Africa to get to Kuwait. And since then, no U.S. commercial vessels have traversed this area, meaning that the U.S. has surrendered the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb, and the Gulf of Aden to the Houthi. Now, they have taken to escorting ships in and out of Djibouti. So, for example, here, this is from a British warship escorting the Maersk Yorktown. This is HMS Diamond escorting Maersk Yorktown into Djibouti and out again. Those are the close escorts we're seeing. U.S. Navy has done this too in escorting vessels in this region because the Houthi have expanded their reach. They're no longer just hitting ships right off the coast, but they're spanning out and extending the area from which they can attack. So the impact the Houthi are having is right here in this chart. You can see the material impact in the number of ships that are transiting through the Suez Canal, the drop in numbers. We're talking about a 2/3 drop in the number of ships and 3/4 drop in the amount of cargo going through. This is impacting Egypt immensely. And understand, Egypt doesn't respond to this for one very good reason. Even though they're losing, estimates have 5 to 7 billion in tolls going through the Suez Canal. On an average year, they make about $10 billion in tolls. The reason the Egyptians haven't responded is because they have Gaza on their border, and they're deathly concerned that Hamas will turn their rocket launchers 180 degrees and start raining down on the Suez Canal and cut what little traffic going through the Suez Canal is currently going through the canal. So how have the ocean carriers responded to this? Well, I mean, we're seeing the attack, obviously, on the motor vessel Tudor, but Frontline CEO says that ships are avoiding the Red Sea and would continue to avoid the Red Sea even with a ceasefire. Frontline is a major tanker company. The Cape of Good Hope oil trade surges as tankers reroute. We're seeing a revision in the amount of profit container lines are making. The container lines have been vocal about the attack by the Houthi, but in truth, they're making new profits. If you look at the second quarter profits of the ocean carriers, they are up. Why are they up? Because freight rates have jumped back up. This is the Drewry Worldwide Container Index. You can see how it jumped up at the very beginning of the attacks, and then you saw that kind of decrease as it went on. And I was in a meeting not too long ago with a senior representative of the U.S. military who talked about, well, you know, we were told that the Houthi attacks are going to increase freight rates, and what we're seeing is a decline. What they didn't understand was that they were seeing the short-term impacts, but the long-term impacts, which kicked back in, have now got freight rates higher than ever before, or at least higher than these attacks have happened. They're nowhere near at the level we saw during the supply chain crisis. And you can see that here on the rates from Shanghai to places like Rotterdam, Los Angeles, Genoa, and New York. Massive upticks in the ocean freight rates. All right, so I laid it out for you. What's the solution to this? So the old system that they were using, the gatekeepers, is kind of gone. They don't have enough assets to do it. It was going to take a large commitment of forces to do it. The Eisenhower is still in the Red Sea. And let me be clear to the Houthi. The Eisenhower doesn't have to be off your coast to be projecting forces ashore. Just because it sails up the Red Sea into the wind, which it has to do for carrier operations, doesn't mean you have sent it running. You've also not hit that vessel. I don't know why the Houthi want to keep making claims of hits. They have a hard time hitting unarmed commercial ships. To hit a U.S. aircraft carrier is not impossible, but it is very unlikely, especially when they put out media of false hits from video games and showing the Russian Kuznetsov aircraft carrier as the Nimitz. It's the Eisenhower. That's great. That's just fantastic. Believe me, the crew on the Eisenhower is fine. The captain is still giving cookies to everybody. Everybody's good. So how do you fix this? How do you go about and rectify this? So there's really two options that are available right now. Number one, if we are not providing protection for ships sailing through the region, then pull back military forces. There's no reason to be doing these operations. Surrender the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb, and the Gulf of Aden to the Houthi. Second to do is, okay, let's change operations. And the operation I would recommend is one I did back in December. I talked about this is what we should have done in the beginning. But again, okay, let's focus on today. Let's start initiating convoy operations, akin to what we did in the Persian Gulf in the late 1980s in Operation Earnest Will. Let's pool together those resources, the U.S., the British, the Allied forces under Operation Prosperity Guardian, the European Union forces under Operation Aspids, the Koreans, the Indians, everybody involved, and let's run convoys through. With the few Aegis class ships you have there, they could provide distance cover. They would be up close along the coast of Yemen, providing that screen cover, while the smaller frigates, those from the European Union and other countries, could provide close in. And you can run convoys daily past this region. It's not a long region. It's not a big region. And right now the ships aren't going through the region. What's even more significant is who's getting protected right now. So this is a snapshot live as I'm filming this video of ships moving in and around the region off of Yemen. And if you just look at the vessels that are up here, you can see ships heading the Fujairah. You can see ships listing as China crew and owner, Chinese crew and owner. My favorite right here is a ship, the Seraphim, Liberian flag. It says it's going to free Palestine. Armed guards on board. You get all the views here. Chinese crews, Russian guards on board, all Chinese, heading to Italy, heading to Suez. You get the imagery here. These ships are all identifying themselves as having nothing to do with what's going on in Israel and Gaza. And so we find ourselves in this unusual position where we're not really guarding ships that are making voyages to and from Europe and Asia that are benefiting the economy of the navies that are out there. The US, the British, the Italians, the Germans, the Dutch, the Belgians, the Koreans, all those countries that are out there. What benefit are they getting from the protection there? Because the vast majority of vessels are heading around the southern tip of Africa, taking that longer voyage. So let's do this. Let's set up those convoys. Ships engaging in those convoys may be able to get lower war risk insurance, or better yet, the countries involved can help underwrite the war risk insurance, especially for those ships going through the region that are flagged under those navies. Ships that are not flagged under those navies, if they want to take advantage of this, well, they're going to have to pay. One of the reasons you have Liberian, Marshall Islands, Isle of Man, Panama registry ships is because those navies are not coming to save you. Yes, if you're on a Liberian flag ship, the Liberian Navy is not coming to get you. And so guess what? You got to pay a little bit for those protections. That's what U.S. flag does. It's what British registry does, what all those registries do. The reason you go save Tom Hanks in Captain Phillips is because he's on a U.S. flag vessel. There were plenty of other crews captured by the Somalis that we did not go help. We helped Tom Hanks because, again, national treasure, but also because he's an American. And that's why you have to do it. And so we need to be rethinking about our strategy. Now, Central Command, all the forces involved have not stated that they have changed their rules of engagement, their concept of operations. None of them has had that. I also think most of the news agencies haven't asked the question. So I'm asking the question. Is there serious consideration to changing the way we're doing operations? Because if we're going to continue doing this, This is not working, especially when the major ocean carriers are saying we're not going back and we may not go back after a ceasefire. If that's the case, why are we keeping the Eisenhower battle group in the Red Sea? Why are we exposing our warships to danger? If shipping companies want to take the risk, they take the risk on their own, and they take that chance, especially with the crews on board. Now, I feel very bad about this. I don't like exposing merchant mariners, no matter what nationality, what registry they're on, to danger. But this is part of the job. And unfortunately, this has happened time and time again where we've seen this happen. But I think we need a serious rethink about what are we doing. Again, whose prosperity are we guarding here? If the bulk of these vessels are Russian, Chinese, Iranian, heading other places, let's figure this out. Let's come up. You don't have to send all the ships back through at the same time, but let's run some national registry ships. Let's run some American ships through. Right now, there are American ships going around Africa. Let's run some American ships through. Let's run some British flag ships. Let's run some French, some Italian. Let's run those major registries of ships that have navies out there, and let's run them through and see what happens and see if we can start reducing the war risk and resuming some sort of ocean travel. Because if not, you have surrendered the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb, and the Gulf of Aden to the Houthi. And the Houthi don't have a right, no matter what they argue, to do this. No nation has a right to do this. And if a non-state actor can do this, then that tells me a state actor can do the same exact thing. What stops a nation from closing an international strait to all traffic just because they want to? That's a problem. And that's what you're opening yourself up to if you allow the Houthi to continue this level of action. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You can hit the super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until our next video, Sal, signing off.